Get under the awning or you'll drown in this downpour. Zoran snapped, voice nearly lost beneath the hammering of alien rain against the corrugated metal roof. His short, dark hair dripped water into his eyes, stinging as he wiped it away with the back of his hand. He barely knew why he bothered yelling at all. The swirling storm was loud, the gloom lit only by occasional flashes of neon blue lightning skittering across the sky. But the figure kneeling in the mud several paces away made no move to seek shelter. Instead, she lifted her face toward him, an eerie reflection of the lightning dancing along the angles of her cheeks. Zoran felt a pull he couldn't explain. Something about that luminous gaze pinned him in place with an intensity that set his heart racing. She seemed more a flicker of dream in the murk than someone real, especially with that pale lavender skin that glistened where rivulets of rain traced down her bare arms. He swore under his breath and stepped out from under the makeshift overhang. The wind whipped water in sheets, so cold it felt like needles on his skin. He hated this world, this ruined outpost battered by unrelenting storms. But he'd come here to scavenge any surviving supplies for a small trading crew that paid him well, provided he made it back with something valuable. Danger or not, he had no choice but to endure the climate. Yet he never expected to find someone else here, especially not someone who clearly wasn't human. When he drew closer, he saw the gentle glow emanating from strips along her temples, like tiny filaments that reacted to the rain. She glanced up at him without smiling. Her dark eyes carried an otherworldly shimmer. There was a haunting scrawl of swirling lines across her collarbones, shining like bioluminescent tattoos. The sight made his throat go tight. He'd heard rumors of species that used organic luminescence, but he'd never been this close to one. She was as tall as he was, though her frame was more sinuous, each movement delicate yet strangely powerful. He offered a hand. Come on, we can't stay out here. If this acid-laced downpour doesn't melt your skin off, the wind will blow you straight off the ridge. His tone was gruffer than he intended. He had a habit of hiding concern behind irritation. She blinked once, then rose, water trailing off her strange garment that clung to her figure. The cold hit him harder when she stood so near. He caught the faint scent of salt and honey, an oddly comforting aroma that must have been hers. Her lips parted, but she hesitated as if uncertain of his language. Then she spoke, voice low, each word rolling with a slight rasp. You help me? He nodded, ignoring the sudden tightness in his chest. Yes. We'll get under cover. This is no place to have a conversation. She nodded, allowed him to lead her back toward the overhang. But it offered only partial protection. A broken metal sheet overhead was nearly buckling under the relentless storm. He pointed toward a squat building a short distance away. We can go inside. There might be a safe room if the roof hasn't caved in. Stay close. They hurried through the mud, boots sinking with each step. She wore some sort of tough, flexible wrap around her legs, but it was tattered, letting her feet be soaked. She moved gracefully despite the terrain. A chunk of metal blew by, narrowly missing them both. Zoran cursed and grabbed her elbow, guiding her around scattered debris from the old outpost structures. When they reached the building's entrance, he shoved against the rusted door. It groaned but gave way, letting them stumble inside. It was pitch dark save for the pale glow from her markings and the sporadic lightning flashes outside. Zoran pulled out a small handheld light, flicking it on to reveal a hallway strewn with broken glass and toppled crates. The smell of damp and mold was intense. Stay behind me, he murmured, glancing over his shoulder to see her studying the corridor with cautious curiosity. He led her to a side room that appeared mostly intact. It contained a few overturned chairs, half-rotted boxes, and a battered console that still had faint power lights flickering. He tested the door to ensure it locked, then motioned for her to step inside. Better than nothing, he said. At least the roof isn't leaking here. Maybe we can wait out the worst of the storm. She brushed rainwater off her arms, then turned to him. Thank you, she said quietly. Her accent gave the basic trade tongue a lilting quality. He shrugged off his jacket, soaked and muddy, before wringing it out. Couldn't just leave you out there. Name's Zoran. She watched his mouth as he spoke, then lightly touched her fingertips to her chest. Inairi. He nodded. Inairi. The name rolled softly off his tongue, and he found himself examining the fine scales tracing the edge of her jawline. Her skin was delicate in appearance, but likely stronger than it looked. He guessed her species was amphibious or at least partially aquatic, judging by the faint sheen. She certainly was drenched, and though the sight of water beating on her shoulders stirred something in him, he tried to ignore the jolt of attraction. "Where are you from?" he asked. She spread her hands, maybe unsure how to answer. Not from here. My people, gone." Her voice wavered, a flash of pain crossing her features. "Now I only survive." Something in him softened. He understood the desperation that came with losing a home, though he rarely admitted it. "Well, you picked a damn harsh place to survive. This outpost's been abandoned for years, and the storms just get worse." "You alone?" She nodded slowly. "Hunted. I ran from them." She didn't say who they were, but her tremor of fear told him enough. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Figures. This sector's crawling with corporate enforcers and the occasional slavers. They don't discriminate when it comes to new species." He thought about the small trading outfit he was working for. They didn't have a good reputation, but Zoran was out here independently. He had a knack for scraping by on the edges. "I guess we're both stuck. My shuttle's parked near the canyon, but it's grounded until the weather eases. The storms mess with the thrusters." And Nairi glanced around, scanning the battered interior. Her gaze fell on a crack in the ceiling where droplets plopped into a growing puddle. "Is it always so cold here?" she asked, hugging herself. He exhaled, rubbing at his arms. "Usually, yes. But it's worse when the wind picks up. Best we can do is find some gear, maybe start a makeshift generator if any of the old cables still function." He flicked the beam of light around. "I'll see if there's a storeroom with blankets or rations. You stay here, try to get dry." She caught his wrist as he turned to go. "Wait. You come back?" The quiet plea in her voice made him meet her eyes. "I'll come back. Don't worry." She released him, but the warmth of her grip lingered even though it was brief. He coughed into his hand, turning away before she noticed the flush creeping up his neck. The last thing he expected on this job was to play rescuer to a mysterious, compelling alien woman. He needed to focus on survival, not the shape of her silhouette when the lightning flashed. He wandered deeper into the structure, stepping carefully over shards of glass and twisted beams. The place had once been some corporate research station, if he recalled the rumors. Now it was mostly gutted. He found a side corridor with a door labeled storage in faded letters. Inside were a few crates, some rotting tarps, and to his surprise a small stack of vacuum-packed emergency blankets. He scooped them up and kept looking, rummaging through a half-open crate that contained old ration bars. Half were moldy, but a few looked sealed enough to be edible, if a bit stale. His footsteps echoed hollowly as he moved. The wind howled outside, reminding him they were far from any real civilization. A sense of unreality pressed in on him. Only a few hours ago, he'd been alone, battered by storm winds. Now he'd found someone he couldn't walk away from. She was fragile and strong all at once, an enigma that awakened emotions he tried to bury. Possibly that was just the adrenaline talking. He shook his head at himself and started back. When he returned, Nairi stood near the broken console, testing a series of glowing keys that flared dimly at her touch. He cleared his throat. "I found blankets. Not sure about heat, though." He placed them on a crate. She turned, offered a small smile that warmed her otherwise serious face. She took a blanket and pressed it close, then gestured at the console's flickering screen. "This machine is some kind of sign?" Zoran approached, fiddling with the knobs. "It's a control panel. Looks like it was for atmospheric testing or something. Doubt it still runs anything vital." He flicked a switch. Static hissed from a hidden speaker, making them both jump. He switched it off. Maybe not a good idea to turn on random systems. Could draw attention. And Nairi frowned as if disappointed, then turned her focus back to the threadbare blanket. She rubbed at the fabric, confusion in her eyes. How does it work? He realized she might never have encountered such a synthetic material. He unfolded one for himself, wrapping it around his shoulders. It's reflective, see? Helps keep body heat in. Just wrap it around you. Like this. He reached to demonstrate, then stopped himself. I mean here, he said more gently, taking a second to carefully drape it around her so it hung over her shoulders. She barely reached up to hold it, and in that moment they stood so close that he could see tiny droplets clinging to the glinting scales near her neck. It struck him how intimate it felt to be huddled in a broken room with a stranger, both soaked and uncertain of what tomorrow might bring. She breathed out softly, water still dripping from the tips of her dark hair. He noticed her hair was thinner in texture, parted by small ridges that curved elegantly along her skull. She had filaments behind her ears that fluttered slightly in the cold air. He forced himself to step back and coughed. We might as well make ourselves comfortable, if that's even possible. The storm could last hours, maybe more. And after that I'll figure out how to get us both off this rock. And Nairi lifted a small ration bar in question. He nodded. Go ahead. She unwrapped it, sniffed suspiciously. He smiled a bit. It's not poison, just tastes like cardboard. She took a tentative bite, her features shifting from wary to mild acceptance. She swallowed, lips curving faintly in approval. Zoran sank onto an overturned crate, trying to ignore the dull ache in his shoulder from lugging salvage earlier in the day. That job felt like a lifetime ago. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant thunder and drumming rain. Her gaze moved around the room, lingering on him every so often. There was something about her eyes, dark, reflective, the pupils oddly shaped, slightly vertical maybe, that kept him fascinated despite himself. He rarely trusted strangers easily, but this place was so bleak, so punishing, that forging an alliance seemed natural for survival. What about your people? He asked softly, reluctant to pry but also curious. If you were traveling with them, maybe I could help you contact them. She bowed her head. They left. Or maybe, taken. Slavers came to our ship. I escaped in a pod crashed here. Her voice grew tight. They came after me. I hid. She motioned toward a long scratch running from her forearm to her elbow, likely a sign of a recent struggle. No choice. Anger flared within him, a familiar resentment of the lawless edges of this galaxy. He knew all too well how those with power preyed on the vulnerable. I won't let them get you. If we can reach my shuttle, I'll try to get us somewhere safe. She studied him, as though searching for any sign of deceit. Why you help me? He hesitated, unsure how to put it into words. You remind me of someone, he finally said, swallowing past the lump in his throat. I can't leave anyone behind to be hunted. He looked away, uncomfortable, revealing more. She nodded, as though his admission made sense in a way words couldn't fully convey. Then she moved closer, kneeling at his side. He tensed, not out of fear but from the sudden awareness of her proximity. She was close enough that he felt her soft exhalation, smelled that faint honey salt scent. Her eyes flicked over him, as if studying the contours of his face. Zoran, she said, pronouncing it carefully. She brushed a stray lock of wet hair from his forehead. The touch made his breath hitch. Her scales caught the faint light, shimmering. Thank you? He swallowed. It's fine. Really. But it didn't feel fine, it felt like the start of something precariously intimate. He wasn't sure he had room in his life for that. Yet the warmth of her hand on his cheek lingered even after she withdrew. He coughed. I'm going to see if we can scrounge up something to start a generator, maybe heat this place a bit. Just stay here, yeah? She nodded, and he forced himself to his feet, ignoring the faint tremor in his legs. Part of him wondered if he was making a mistake letting her in. The other part couldn't deny how relieved he felt not to be alone out here in the harshness of an abandoned station. He searched the adjacent rooms, finding partial wiring and a small portable generator unit battered by years of neglect. After some tinkering, A spark of hope flared as the device coughed to life. He dragged it into the main room, hooking it up to an overhead light fixture that flickered on with a faint yellow glow. Nairi blinked, stunned by the sudden illumination, then smiled in delight. The sight made something tighten in his chest. Soon the feeble warmth from the generator's vent filled the space, pushing back the worst of the chill. Zoran sat again, rummaging through supplies. She lowered herself across from him, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. Her scales and glowing markings were more visible in the light, a mesmerizing pattern of lines curving along the side of her neck and trailing down her arms. There was a tension in the air, but not an uncomfortable one. He felt their closeness acutely, every breath reminding him how small this space was, how the storm outside made them reliant on each other in the dark. She touched one of the neon lines on her collarbone, the luminescence bright against her lavender skin. "Your kind, they do not glow like this?" He let out a half-chuckle. "No. We're dull by comparison, sorry to say. We just have these plain old human bodies. No fancy lights." She tilted her head. "But your eyes," she murmured, watching the flicker of the overhead bulb reflected in his gaze. "They glow with warmth. Different, but nice." The remark hit him unexpectedly, stirring a faint heat in his cheeks. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the patter of the rain a distant backdrop. He had no idea how she perceived him. Probably as some scruffy pilot in a beaten jacket who smelled like engine grease and fear. But that small, genuine compliment made him feel seen in a way he hadn't for a long time. He cleared his throat. "We should get some rest if we can. I'll keep an ear out. Storm might settle by morning or maybe it'll rage for days, but either way, we'll need our strength." She nodded, shifting to sit closer. "Yes, rest." He tried to calm his pulse as her leg brushed his. It wasn't exactly a romantic setting, this dismal ruin, but the intimacy of survival bound them in a fragile bubble of shared warmth. He gave her the extra blanket, ignoring the damp chill that seeped under his own. She was the one who had more to lose out here, especially if her hunters caught up. Her eyes stayed open a long time, watchful. Eventually, though, she tucked her chin against her chest and let her eyelids fall. Zoran found himself unable to sleep right away. His mind churned with questions. Who was she really? What had happened on her ship? And what would he do once the storm passed, and they had to face the outside world again? Was it even safe to bring her with him? He pressed his palms to his eyes, shoving the doubts aside. If he'd learned anything in his rough life, it was that tomorrow's problems would come, no matter what. For tonight, he had a responsibility, to protect her, to stay alert, to survive. Maybe that was enough. He eventually drifted into a light doze, heart pounding in an odd mix of apprehension and comfort at her presence. Her breathing was soft. The rain pounded overhead, ceaseless. In the back of his mind, he sensed that everything had changed in a single day, though he couldn't yet guess how. When Zoran stirred hours later, the storm still raged, but the distant thunder had softened. A cold ache had settled into his muscles from sleeping in a cramped position. Across from him, Nairi dozed fitfully, her blanket half fallen, revealing the faint luminescent patterns on her arm. He rose quietly, approached, and gently repositioned the blanket. She stirred, eyelids fluttering open. For a moment, her eyes flashed with alarm before recognition softened her features. She sat up, stretching. "Still dark?" she noted, voice husky from sleep. He nodded, rotating a stiff shoulder. "Yeah, but I think it's getting better out there. The wind's not so violent. I can try to check the door, see if we can make our way back to my shuttle soon." Nairi stood, the blanket sliding from her shoulders. "I come with you. I feel..." She paused, searching for the word. "Bad. Trapped here." He understood. Nobody wanted to stay in this crumbling building longer than necessary. Together, they moved to the door. He unbolted it slowly, bracing for a sudden gust of wind. Rain still fell, but it had turned into more of a steady drizzle rather than a brutal downpour. The sky outside was a murky gray, lit by the occasional flash of that unnerving bluish lightning. The ground was a swamp of mud and debris. and Nairi peered out, her filaments twitching as if sensing the humidity. Wet, she commented, a small wry twist to her lips. We stay dry inside? Zoran let out a short laugh. We could, but I've got a better idea. He stepped onto the slick ground, boots sinking an inch into the mud. Let's see if we can scavenge a bit more, then head for my shuttle. If we're lucky, it's still intact. She followed him into the drizzle, looking up at the swirling clouds. The glow lines along her arms seemed to brighten slightly, reacting to the moisture. My people, some of us like water, but this place feels wrong. She hugged herself. He nodded sympathetically. Trust me, it's not exactly a welcoming environment for anyone. He led her around the broken perimeter fence, scanning for anything that might be of value, a working device, salvageable electronics, or maybe a leftover fuel cell. The more resources they had, the better their odds of escape. They moved carefully, avoiding jagged metal. The structures looked even more desolate in the dim daylight, half-collapsed walls rising like ghosts. Zoran kept glancing at Nairi's face, watching the tension lines around her mouth. She was edgy, possibly expecting her pursuers to ambush them at any moment. He tried to reassure her with a nod whenever their eyes met, though he wasn't sure how much confidence he really had. As they passed what looked like a communications tower, Nairi slowed. Her head tilted, filaments quivering. I hear something, she whispered. He paused, straining to listen. Through the hiss of rain, he thought he caught the faint hum of an engine overhead. His heart lurched. Damn! Could be a patrol ship. Instinct took over. Get down! They ducked beneath a sheet of twisted metal, pressing close. Zoran squinted at the sky, glimpsing a faint shape through the clouds, a small craft, scanning the surface. It bore no markings he recognized, but it moved with purposeful sweeps as though searching for something. Possibly them. And Nairi's breath caught. They found me, she whispered, her voice trembling. She lowered her gaze, her fists clenched. Zoran gritted his teeth. Not necessarily. They might just be running a routine patrol. But we can't stay in the open. He slipped a hand around her waist to steady her, as they moved along the remnants of a crumbling wall. The closeness felt electric, but fear overshadowed any spark of attraction right now. He had to keep her safe. They crouched behind a chunk of rubble, drenched again by the drizzle. The hum of the craft grew louder, passing overhead. Zoran risked a glance, glimpsing a bright searchlight sweeping across the outpost. The beam nearly touched their hiding spot. His gut tightened. He pressed Nairi against the wall, shielding her with his body. She gripped his jacket, eyes wide. He felt her heart pounding through the contact, or maybe it was his own thundering pulse. After a few tense moments, the craft moved on, the sound fading as it continued its search. They stayed still, barely daring to breathe. Only once the hum became distant did Zoran slowly release her. We should get out of here now, he said. She nodded, her face pale in the dull light. Your ship far? About 1 kilometer that way. He nodded past the collapsed fence. In a canyon. There's some cover, but it's a trek. They exchanged a look that said everything. They had no real choice. They set off, trying to stay low. The muddy terrain made every step a slog. The drizzle turned heavier, soaking them for the second time in the last day. Still, they pushed forward. Adrenaline kept Zoran sharp, scanning the horizon for signs of the patrol craft. And Nairi moved with fluid grace, but he could tell she was strung tight. Halfway there, they took shelter behind a collapsed cargo module. Zoran wiped water from his face, noticing how Nairi's wet hair clung to her cheeks. She looked up at the swirling clouds. We're both soaked again, she murmured. Then, unexpectedly, her lips curved in a wry smile. Aye, very wet. Now you must get me, wetter? He blinked, caught off guard by the playful note. A startled laugh escaped him, though he quickly stifled it. I guess you're not entirely opposed to water, huh? A small thrill shot through him at her teasing, especially in the midst of danger. Something about her quicksilver shift from fear to humor pulled at him. Let's just say I'll do my best not to let you drown, he managed, meeting her gaze. She leaned closer, droplets streaming down her collarbone. On my home world, water is life. Here, it feels like a threat. But maybe. She trailed off, the subtext swirling in the space between them. The moment stretched, charged. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice even. We should keep moving. The more we wait, the more time they have to find us. But his tone gentled. We can talk about all this later. She nodded and they pressed on. As they neared the canyon, the terrain grew rocky, with large boulders providing partial cover from overhead scans. Zoran led the way, slipping between jagged stone walls. At last, they reached a clearing where, beneath a camouflaged tarp, a small shuttle waited. It was a battered old craft, but it was his. He'd spent years patching it up, and it had saved his life more times than he could count. Home sweet home, he said dryly, motioning for Aniri to follow him inside through the side hatch. She ducked her head, stepping onto the cramped interior. The shuttle smelled of stale air and old engine grease. But it was dry, and the cockpit was intact. Zoran rushed to the pilot's seat, tapping the console to bring the systems online. The lights sputtered, and a half-dead hum filled the cabin. He muttered a curse, toggling switches. Storm messed up the thrusters. I'll need a few minutes to reroute power. He glanced back to see Aniri exploring the small living area, running her fingers over the seat cushions, the overhead compartments. You fly this? She asked, curiosity bright in her eyes. Yeah. It's not fancy, but it gets me places. He sighed as the readouts flickered. If the storm's still messing with the engines, we might have to wait. But we'll be safer here than out in the open. Aniri came to stand beside him. I wish my ship. She shook her head, a shadow crossing her face. But it's gone. They destroyed it. He hesitated, then rested a hand lightly on her arm. We'll find a way for you. Maybe I can drop you somewhere safe, or help locate your people if they made it. The words sounded hollow, even to him. Safe places were a rarity in this galaxy, especially for someone being hunted. But he wanted to give her hope if he could. She nodded, mouth set in a determined line. Her gaze moved around the cockpit, then settled on him. The moment stretched again, an unspoken tension rippling. He realized how close they stood, how the small confines of the shuttle forced them into intimate proximity. Her eyes flicked to his lips, and a jolt went through him. For a heartbeat, he thought she might close that distance. Part of him longed for it, despite the chaos outside. But she didn't. Instead, she stepped back, as if catching her breath. He turned his focus to the console, ignoring the flutter in his chest. Let me see if I can coax the thrusters back. Maybe we can at least lift off enough to avoid any ground patrols. He busied himself with wiring beneath the controls, trying to steady his racing thoughts. It had been a long time since he'd felt that raw pull toward another being. He was almost angry at the vulnerability it stirred, but also, he welcomed it, maybe. Aniri crouched beside him, watching his hands deftly connect circuits. I can help? She asked quietly. He appreciated the offer, though he wasn't sure how she could. Still, he pointed to a panel. Check if those wires are corroded. If so, we'll need to replace them with spares from the back. She obeyed, carefully examining the lines. He watched her graceful movements, the way her filaments flickered in the dim cabin light. A spike of protective instinct rose in him. He didn't want to fail her. And the harsh reality was that if the thrusters didn't come back online, they were sitting ducks when that patrol returned. Time slipped by intense concentration. Finally, the console beeped with a partial system reboot. Zoran exhaled in relief. That's something. We have partial power. He tested the throttle. It sputtered, but the engines spun up, their vibrations shaking the hull. We might not achieve full orbit in this weather, but at least we can move. Aniri smiled, a spark of hope in her eyes. You do this well. Years of practice, he said, feeling a small burst of pride. Let's see if we can lift off. He engaged the thrusters, and the shuttle rose a few meters above the ground, groaning under the effort. They wobbled, then hovered. Outside, the drizzle still fell, and lightning flickered in the distance. I'll bring us to a safer spot, maybe behind that cliff face. Then we can wait until the storm passes enough to break Atmo. He guided the shuttle forward, gently maneuvering it along the canyon floor. They found a rocky overhang, a natural fortress of stone that shielded them from the worst of the wind. Once settled, he powered down to minimal systems, letting the engines rest. That should keep us off their scanners for a bit. Nairi nodded, peering out a small viewport. The slope of the canyon walls and the swirling sky beyond created an imposing scene. The knowledge that slavers or corporate hunters were out there searching made the respite feel precarious. But at least they had shelter now, an option to flee if they got the engines fully stable. Exhaustion weighed on Zoran again, but he forced himself to check the short-range scanners. No immediate signs of other craft in the area, he murmured. That's good. She came closer, settling into the co-pilot's seat, curiosity lingering in her expression as she studied the blinking lights. Your world must be different. He arched a brow. I don't really have a home world. Born on a transport ship. Raised in different ports. I guess everywhere is different and nowhere feels like home. The admission slipped out before he could stop it. He'd never been good at forming attachments or trusting in permanence. And Nairi's gaze softened. Then, maybe we find home together. She winced slightly as if that statement was too direct, too raw. But she didn't take it back. He let out a slow breath, feeling a complicated tangle of emotions. We can see, he whispered. A moment of hush followed. Outside, thunder rolled, but it was quieter now. Inside, the cockpit lights bathed them both in a soft glow. He was acutely aware of how near she sat, that faint smell of salt honey drifting toward him. The day they'd spent together had been one of survival, yet he sensed that something deeper connected them: loss, fear, the fleeting relief of finding someone who cares in a ruthless galaxy. She shifted, water still glistening on her arms. I feel still wet, she said with a mischievous curve of her lips, referencing her earlier teasing. But here, maybe it's safe. His breath caught. It's safer, yes. Enough to relax a little, I guess. Her eyes flicked to his with an intensity that made his heart stutter. She leaned forward, something questioning in her posture. He found himself meeting her halfway, the tension humming. He could practically taste the anticipation. But just as her hand brushed his cheek, the shuttle's alarm beeped, loud and sudden. He jerked upright, adrenaline spiking. Incoming signal, he muttered, tapping the console. A coded ping repeated. Damn, someone's trying to hail us. Probably a patrol. He flicked a switch to disable the automated response, his heart racing. And Nairi's face had gone pale. They found you? Could be. Or maybe they're hailing any vessel in the area. We can't risk responding. I've jammed the comm. The weight of tension crushed any tender moment that might have bloomed. We should be ready to take off at a second's notice if they come closer. And Nairi nodded, coiling her arms around herself in a protective gesture. I'm sorry, she whispered, guilt in her expression. If not for me. He caught her arm, ignoring the flutter that ran through him. Don't. This galaxy is cruel, and you didn't ask for any of it. We survived together, okay? His eyes locked with hers. She gave a faint nod. For a moment, he thought she might break. But she stayed resolute, swallowing her fear. He noticed the way her markings glowed a touch brighter, as though responding to her emotions. A tense silence followed. Zoran kept the scanners running, searching for any sign of ships. Rain pelted the hull, but calmer than before. Time passed in an agonizing slow drip. He considered trying to lighten the mood but found no words that felt appropriate. The alarm's beep had scattered whatever fragile closeness they'd been building. Now the reality of potential danger loomed larger than ever. Eventually, the scanners pinged once more, though it was a faint reading. Zoran frowned, watching a speck appear and vanish on the display. They're sweeping the area. We can't stay here forever. He glanced at Nairi, noticing the exhaustion etched into her features. She'd gone through so much already. I'll wait for a lull. Then we'll attempt to exit the atmosphere. If we can outrun them, we have a shot at reaching a safer port or station. She gave a tight nod. You lead. I follow. He tried to smile, but it felt forced. Just don't blame me if this bucket of bolts sputters out mid-flight. Her lips curved faintly at that. Humor was thin comfort, but it was all he had. While he waited for the moment to launch, he busied himself with double-checking the shuttle systems, adjusting power outputs, reviewing the battered hull's structural integrity. If they faced pursuit, the shuttle wasn't equipped for battle. Speed and stealth were their only advantages. And Nairi drifted to the small living area again, rummaging for anything that might be useful. She found a worn towel and tried patting herself dry, though it didn't do much good. Zoran gave her some of his extra clothes, loose-fitting pants and a too-big shirt that she eyed curiously. It's not exactly your style, he said, but it's better than being soaked. She accepted them, stepping into the back compartment. He forced himself not to stare after her, not to imagine the outline of her form as she changed. His cheeks burned at the memory of her closeness. He needed to keep a level head. But his body thrummed with an awareness he hadn't felt in years. An awareness of her presence, her scent, the shape of her mouth when she whispered his name. He wrestled with the controls, double-checking the thrust ratio. By the time she returned, wearing his clothes that draped on her slender frame, the engine readouts were stable enough for a triad escape. The tension in her expression remained. She sank into the co-pilot's seat, placing a hand on the console. I am ready, she said softly, though her eyes flicked up to meet his with a vulnerability that tugged at him. He exhaled, nodding. All right. Let's hope this works. He started the launch sequence. The shuttle thrummed, vibrations rattling them. Outside, the canyon walls blurred as he eased the ship higher. Rainwater cascaded off the hull, and the engine strained. Lightning flickered across the sky. The readouts beeped with warnings about atmospheric conditions. Still, they rose. And Nairi gripped the armrest, her knuckles pale. Zoran clenched his jaw, pushing the thrusters. The shuttle trembled violently. For a second, he thought the storm would swallow them. Then they broke through a veil of clouds into the upper atmosphere, the craft juddering but holding steady. He set a course away from the outpost, scanning for any sign of intercept. A ping blared. 2 unidentified ships on an intercept vector. Hang on, he growled, pushing the throttle. And Nairi gasped as they jolted forward, the engines howling in protest. The gloom of the storm parted behind them, but the red lights on the console indicated pursuit. They're faster, Nairi said, voice taut. Maybe, but they don't know me. Zoran shot back, flipping a switch that routed emergency power to the engines. The shuttle lurched, accelerating beyond safe limits. The hull rattled dangerously, but their speed spiked. He banked hard, weaving through the rocky upper ridges that jutted into the lower atmosphere. The pursuers angled after them, beams of scanning lasers sweeping the clouds. He risked a glance at Nairi. Fear warred with determination on her face, but she kept her gaze forward, trusting him to pilot. That trust fueled his resolve. If he had to burn out every last circuit in this ship to get her clear, he'd do it. This might be a suicidal flight, but he refused to let them capture her. Alarms blared again as plasma bursts streaked past the shuttle, near misses that sizzled in the swirling vapors. They must have a short-range cannon. Zoran cursed, twisting the controls to dodge. Lightning flashed, momentarily revealing a jagged spire of rock to their left. He skirted around it at breakneck speed, the underside of the shuttle scraping so close that sparks flew. And Nairi let out a strangled sound, gripping the seat so hard her filaments stood on end. One enemy ship closed in. Zoran grit his teeth, scanning the console for anything that might help. He had no weapons to speak of, only a single decoy flare used for small meteor swarms. With little choice, he fired it, a bright burst of heat that flared behind them. The lead pursuer veered off, uncertain if it was a weapon, giving Zoran precious seconds to climb higher. We're almost through the worst of the atmosphere, he said, voice tight. Once we're in near orbit, I can spool up the hyperdrive. Inairi's chest rose and fell rapidly. We outrun them? If we're lucky. The second ship unleashed another volley of plasma. One shot grazed the shuttle's tail, sending a shudder through the hull. Sparks erupted from the rear console. Damn it! Zoran spat, trying to compensate. The shuttle wobbled, but he forced it onward, ignoring the acrid smell of burnt wiring. They were close. He could feel it in the thinning air and the diminishing storm clouds below. If they could just push a little farther. With a final burst of power, the shuttle broke into the upper stratosphere. The blackness of space loomed overhead, dotted with faint stars. The enemy ships rose behind them, but with the planet's gravity lessening, Zoran had a fighting chance. Hang on, he urged, flipping the hyperdrive power to maximum. The engine sputtered, coughed. For a terrifying second, he thought it would fail. Then it roared to life, propelling them forward in a surge of inertia. As they hurtled away, the pursuers vanished behind them. Zoran quickly punched in coordinates for a nearby sector that was rumored to have a rogue space station or two where they might hide. The NAV computer beeped acceptance. He activated the drive, and starlight stretched into lines around them. They shot into faster-than-light travel, leaving the wet, storm-ridden planet behind. Only when they were safely in the swirling void of hyperspace did Zoran release a ragged breath, slumping back in his seat. His hands shook on the controls. Inairi stared at him, chest heaving. Sweat glistened on her brow. The silence pressed in, broken only by the hum of the hyperdrive. We did it, she whispered. He mustered a shaky grin. Yeah. We're not out of danger yet, but at least we're not in their crosshairs. He winced at the console's flickering lights. I'll need to repair the tail end soon, but we'll manage. Inairi leaned back, closing her eyes. A tremor passed through her body. Then she let out a soft, almost disbelieving laugh. I thought we would die. Me too, he admitted, letting the adrenaline drain from him. But we're alive. Her gaze flicked to him, luminous in the cockpit's half-light. Because of you. She reached out, hesitating only a moment before her hand found his. He let her take it, feeling the cool dryness of her skin, the faint ridges of her scales. That simple contact radiated warmth between them. He swallowed, a tension building in his chest that was equal parts relief and unspoken desire. Guess we're a team now, he said, forcing a note of levity. Let's see where this new route takes us. We might have to lay low for a while. She laced her fingers through his. Together. The sincerity in her eyes nearly took his breath. Outside the viewport, hyperspace streams shimmered, carrying them into the unknown. In the small confines of the cockpit, the air was thick with the possibility of what came next. They had escaped immediate danger, but now a new journey began, a precarious alliance that balanced on trust, shared need, and something even deeper than either had anticipated. Zoran felt it thrumming in his veins, a quiet promise that they might find more than survival in each other. And as Inairi's grip on his hand tightened, he dared to believe that perhaps she felt it too. By the time they dropped out of hyperspace near an unregistered station, Zoran was dog-tired, though he tried not to show it. The station was an ugly hodgepodge of metal modules cobbled together over decades, floating in the vast emptiness. No official authority, no real safety, but also no prying eyes. He sent a docking request, half expecting no response. To his mild surprise, a surly voice replied with a berth assignment, clearly in exchange for credits. He transferred the docking fee and guided the shuttle into a cramped airlock, metal scraping metal. Inairi stayed close as they vented the cabin and stepped onto the station's walkway. The inside smelled of stale recirculated air, old cooking grease, and ozone. A few rough-looking figures ambled by, paying them little mind. This was the kind of place where everyone kept to themselves, as curiosity was often lethal. Zoran scanned the rows of neon-lit signs overhead, shops that promised black market tech, questionably legal augments, or cheap lodging. The hiss of the station's ventilation systems was constant. He led Inairi down a narrow corridor, past flickering overhead lights. We can find a mechanic to help with the shuttle's tail damage, he muttered. Then maybe rent a small room to lay low. She nodded, though her eyes flicked nervously at each passerby. Her markings glowed dimly, likely subdued from stress. I don't know these people, she whispered. They seem not kind. He huffed a humorless laugh. They're not. But they keep their noses out of others' business if we do the same. Best we can hope for. They found a mechanic stall run by a hulking reptilian alien with cybernetic eyes. After a terse negotiation that cost Zoran more credits than he liked, the mechanic agreed to patch up the shuttle in the next few hours. While that was handled, he and Inairi slipped away, climbing a shaky metal staircase to a cluster of cramped lodging pods. They found a vacant one, paying the automated kiosk. The doors slid open with a grinding hiss, revealing a space barely large enough for a bunk, a narrow wash station, and a flickering overhead light. The walls bore old scorch marks, and the smell of disinfectant lingered. Not exactly luxury accommodations, but at least it had a lock. Inairi stepped inside, eyes scanning the small bunk. She perched on its edge. Zoran locked the door behind them, letting out a weary exhale. Finally, they had a moment to breathe. She studied her palms, then looked at him. Is this what your life is always like? He let out a hollow chuckle. Not always. Sometimes it's worse. Sometimes it's better. But yeah, scrounging, running, drifting, this is all I know. A pang twisted in his chest as he realized how true that was. Inairi tilted her head. I see sadness in your eyes sometimes. You lost something? Her directness startled him. He scrubbed a hand over his face. A long time ago, yeah? My family got caught in a crossfire between corporate enforcers and a rebel group. I was a kid. I survived. They didn't. Since then, I do whatever I can to keep going. He shrugged, as though it were no big deal, but the old ache roared back momentarily. She rose, crossing the tiny space. Her presence was a quiet comfort, her voice hushed. I'm sorry, she said, and rested a hand on his forearm. I understand losing. The truth of that shared pain resonated between them. He touched her wrist gently, feeling the slight roughness of her scales. What about you? He asked, though softly. You said your people were taken? She nodded, swallowing hard. We were travelers. Explorers. Not many of us left, so we journeyed to find a place we can live in peace. But we were discovered, raiders, slavers, they attacked. Some of my people might still live, but I don't know where. I fled, and ended up alone on that planet, hiding from them. Zoran felt anger coil in his gut at the thought of such cruelty. We'll figure something out, he said impulsively. We can look for leads, maybe find them. A tear glistened in her dark eye, and she quickly wiped it away. You would do that? He gave a terse nod. If that's what you want, yeah. I don't have a better purpose right now. Might as well do something that matters. He let out a self-deprecating laugh. I'm not exactly a hero, Inairi. I'm just a guy trying to get by. But I can't stand the idea of leaving you in danger. She bowed her head, then leaned in, resting her forehead against his shoulder. The contact made his breath catch, an unexpected moment of trust. He closed his eyes, letting the closeness seep into the battered corners of his heart. She was warm, her slight tremble echoing his own. They stayed like that for a moment, two lost souls finding brief solace in a grimy lodging pod that stank of industrial cleaner. Then Inairi straightened, eyes moist but resolute. She cleared her throat, blinking as if embarrassed. Thank you, Zoran. I feel not alone when I'm with you. He nodded, voice rough. Yeah, likewise. She stepped back, brushing damp hair behind one ear. I think I should get rid of these wet clothes, she murmured, plucking at the borrowed shirt that clung to her in patches. His pulse did a small flip. Right. I should do the same. There's a sonic rinse station in the corner. Might not be the best, but it'll help. Inairi eyed the cramped stall that served as the wash area. It was basically a narrow cubicle with flickering lights. We can share? She asked, the question laced with innocent curiosity, and something else. Zoran's mouth went dry. He tried to keep his voice casual. It's too small for more than one, but yeah, sure, we can try. He almost slapped himself for that half-hearted explanation. The truth was, the idea of being in that enclosed space with her, bare skin to scaled skin, made his heart hammer. But she looked so earnest, as though this was a practical suggestion. Maybe it was normal for her species. She nodded, stepping into the stall. He followed, trying not to crowd her. The door slid shut behind them, leaving them in near darkness except for a faint green glow from the overhead panel. The stall was indeed tiny, barely allowing them to stand side by side. He reached for the control, activating a low hum as the sonic waves vibrated, loosening dirt and water from their clothes and skin. And Nairi slipped the shirt off, revealing her lavender shoulders and the intricate luminous patterns across her torso. She let out a soft gasp at the sensation of the sonic pulses, then glanced at him. He quickly averted his gaze to the wall, skin burning. Sorry, he muttered. She tilted her head, stepping closer. You are shy? She asked, a hint of teasing in her tone. He let out a nervous laugh. Humans usually, we're not used to communal washing with strangers. Her hand brushed his arm, coaxing him to look at her. We're not strangers anymore, she said softly. The flicker of the overhead light glinted on the shimmering lines along her chest, and he felt the breath rush from his lungs at the alien beauty before him. She was unlike anyone he'd known, and yet in that moment, she felt closer than any human could. He lifted a hand, lightly trailing his fingertips along one of her glowing markings. She trembled at the contact, and a low hum escaped her throat. This is normal, she whispered. To share closeness, physical warmth. His own body reacted to her nearness, every nerve alive. I'm learning, he managed, swallowing hard. The small hum of the sonic waves, the claustrophobic walls, the intangible tension building, it all coalesced into a heady mix. A spark ignited in her gaze, and he found himself leaning in, his lips close to hers. They hovered there, hearts pounding. Then she closed the gap, pressing her mouth to his. A rush of sensation enveloped him, the softness of her lips, the exotic taste of her skin, the heat that coursed through his veins. He cradled her face, the scaled ridges behind her ear brushing his palm. She responded eagerly, a quiet moan vibrating against his lips. The stall walls felt non-existent in that moment. All he knew was the press of her body, and the swirl of longing that rocked him. He broke the kiss to catch his breath, pressing his forehead against hers. Inairi, he whispered. She exhaled shakily. Soren, she murmured back, her filaments quivering against his cheek. There was a question in her eyes, a kind of raw vulnerability. He kissed her again, slower this time, exploring the shape of her lips, tasting the faint saltiness of her skin. She slid her arms around his shoulders, pulling him closer. The sonic waves whirred around them, a strange backdrop to this intimate moment. The tingle of the pulses only heightened his awareness of every inch of contact. He let his hands roam gently down her back, feeling the smooth planes of her muscles and the faint ridges of scales near her spine. She shivered, pressing closer. Their breaths mingled, hearts hammering. Outside, the station's mechanical hum was a distant reality. Inside this stall, it was just the two of them, forging a bond in the face of all they'd endured. Eventually, the hum of the sonic cycle ceased, plunging them into a hush broken only by their ragged breathing. He nuzzled her cheek, a thousand thoughts spinning in his mind: fear, hope, desire, uncertainty. We should get out of here, he murmured, before someone complains about us hogging the wash. She let out a small, breathy laugh, stepping back slightly. In the dim light, he saw the flush on her lavender cheeks. Yes. Maybe. They dried off as best they could, the station's meager resources offering thin towels. Zoran was painfully aware of his own heart pounding, and of the surge of emotion that threatened to unravel his carefully guarded walls. When they emerged, the bunk area felt claustrophobic as well, but at least they had a locked door. He rummaged in the small bag of clothes he'd brought, handing her a clean set to wear. She accepted, giving him a grateful smile. He dressed in spare clothes too, sitting on the edge of the bunk. They were both quiet for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. Aniri approached, placing a hand on his knee. I am not sure how this works for humans. But for my people, closeness is important. When we trust someone, we share ourselves. He took her hand in both of his. I'm not sure either, he confessed. It's been a long time since I let myself get close. But I do know I don't want to lose you now. A soft light came into her eyes. Then we figure it out, she said, voice trembling with a mix of anxiety and hope. He pulled her gently onto the bunk beside him. The bed was narrow, forcing them to press together. She didn't seem to mind. The overhead light flickered, casting dancing shadows on the metal walls. For a long time, they just lay side by side, hands intertwined, exchanging murmured words that confirmed neither of them knew exactly what the future held. But in that tiny lodging pod, the world narrowed to the sound of each other's breathing, the warmth of intertwined fingers, and the unspoken promise that they would face whatever came next together. When they stirred the next morning, if one could call any cycle, morning, on a station that barely differentiated day from night, Zoran was anxious to check on the shuttle. The station's lighting had shifted from dull orange to a stark white, indicating a new shift in the facility's schedule. The corridor outside was busier now. They dodged a few suspicious glances from station residents as they headed back to the mechanic's workshop. The reptilian mechanic was true to his word. He'd patched the hull, replaced some wiring, and hammered out the worst of the plasma scorch marks. Zoran examined the repairs with a practiced eye, satisfied enough not to haggle too hard. As the mechanic left them to finalize the last touches, Aniri hovered behind him, arms folded protectively. Zoran tapped a console. Looks stable. We might have to keep an eye out for further damage, but it should hold. The question is, where do we go from here? Aniri looked thoughtful, filaments twitching. If we keep running, slavers might find us eventually. Perhaps we need information about them, about any captives they took from my ship. She lifted her chin. I won't hide forever. I need to know if my family still lives. He admired her resolve. So you want to find leads, track them down? She gave a solemn nod. Yes, if we can. He scratched his jaw. We can poke around the station, see if anyone deals in intel. But it's risky. The place is full of cutthroats. Still, he saw the determination in her eyes. She needed closure or hope. He understood that feeling all too well. All right, let's try the local bar. People talk there. Maybe we can pay for tips. She agreed, and they locked the shuttle up. Wandering deeper into the station's interior, they eventually found a smoky, dimly lit tavern wedged between a gambling den and a corridor of private booths. Electronic music throbbed from hidden speakers, and a variety of species nursed drinks at battered tables. The bar was staffed by a barrel-chested human with a cybernetic arm who eyed them warily as they approached. Zoran ordered a cheap drink, passing over some credits. Aniri stood beside him, scanning the room. He could tell she was tense, not comfortable among so many strangers. He kept a hand near his blaster, just in case. He leaned over the bar, keeping his voice low. We're looking for any rumors about slaver ships that might have passed through or done business here. They'd be hauling unusual captives. He nudged his cred stick forward suggestively. The bartender eyed it, then met Zoran's gaze. Slavers, huh? They come and go. Could be corporate affiliates or just free agents. Not my business. You want info? Check with the information broker in the corner booth. He jerked his chin toward a shadowy figure hunched over a flickering hollow screen at the far end. Zoran gave a curt thanks and, with Aniri at his side, crossed the crowded room. They approached the hooded figure, who was tapping at the hollow interface. Without looking up, the broker muttered, State your query, and be quick. Zoran slipped into the seat. Aniri lingered next to him, her posture guarded. We want intel on a slaver raid that happened recently. They took an alien species like her. He gestured subtly to Aniri. The broker's gaze flicked up, glinting with curiosity. A raspy voice emerged from beneath the hood. Interesting. That's not a common species. You'll have to pay well. Zoran tried not to let annoyance show. How much? A bony hand extended. 2,000 credits for a possible lead. Zoran grimaced. He didn't have that much to spare, not after the shuttle repairs. But he glanced at Aniri, saw the flicker of hope in her face. He sighed, transferring the funds. The broker smirked. Pleasure doing business. Recently, a group calling themselves the Targa Collective came through with a cargo of unusual prisoners. Rumor is they sold them off to a buyer in the Velosia system, near the outer ring. Something about their unique genetic attributes. They left here about a week ago. Aniri's breath hitched. That might be them, she whispered, looking at Zoran with wide eyes. Zoran turned back to the broker. Any details on who they sold to, or how many survived? The broker tapped the hollow pad. No freebies. Another 1,000 for more details. Zoran glared. You're bleeding me dry here. The broker shrugged, unperturbed. Information costs. Or you can walk away ignorant. Aniri reached out, resting a hand on Zoran's arm as if sensing his frustration. He exhaled, transferring the extra credits. The broker nodded in satisfaction. They sold them to a biotech lab that's rumored to do hush-hush research on exotic species. I heard mention that half were already dead, but the rest would be transported further into the system for experimentation. Aniri's face paled, tears shimmering in her eyes. Dead? She pressed her lips together, fighting the tremor in her voice. Where? The name of this place? The broker hesitated, glancing at the small stash of credits. The lab is on a planet called Halavris, supposed to be heavily guarded. If you're planning a rescue, you'll need more than just your little shuttle. Zoran clenched his jaw, all too aware that they were out of their depth. We'll figure it out. He stood, pulling Aniri gently away. She followed, her face taut with grief and fury. Once they found a quieter corner in the station's corridors, Zoran put a hand on her shoulder. We have a lead. That's something. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, eyes bright with tears. They might be dead. Or dying. We have to go there. He nodded, heart heavy. We will. But we can't waltz in unprepared. That lab, they'll have security, resources. We need a plan. She inhaled unsteadily, blinking back tears. Yes. A plan. He thought quickly. We could try to hire help, but credits are low. We might scavenge a few jobs to earn more, or see if any local mercenaries hate the Targa Collective enough to join us cheap. Aniri wrapped her arms around herself, as though trying to hold herself together. I can't wait too long. They're suffering. Zoran rubbed the tension building in his temples. I know. Let's see if the mechanic or someone else might point us toward a local who hates slavers. Sometimes vigilantes or rebels gather in these out-of-the-way stations. They spent the next few hours scouring the station's underbelly, approaching shady corners in search of potential allies. Most brushed them off, no interest in tangling with slavers for free. The few that might be sympathetic demanded sky-high fees. It seemed they were on their own, with limited funds and a battered ship. Eventually, they retreated to the mechanic's stall, discussing possible routes to Halavris, ways to slip past the planet's defenses. As they talked, Zoran noticed Aniri's eyes flicking back and forth, a storm of worry swirling beneath her calm facade. He reached out, gently taking her hand. We'll find a way. Even if it's just the two of us. She squeezed his fingers. I believe you, she said, though her voice shook. She hesitated, then leaned in, letting her forehead rest against his. Her scales were warm to the touch, her breath trembling. Promise me we'll try. He brushed his lips against hers, a tender reassurance. We'll try, he repeated, voice soft. She closed her eyes, relief mingling with the sorrow etched on her face. The mechanic cleared his throat loudly. Zoran stepped back, scowling at the intrusion. But the mechanic only shrugged. Your ship's all set. Pay up or get out. Zoran transferred the final credits, leaving them dangerously close to broke. We'll be on our way. He glanced at Inairi. Are you ready? She nodded, standing straighter. Yes. Let's go. Together, they boarded the shuttle, running pre-flight checks. The engines purred smoothly, thanks to the repairs. With a final glance at the station's dingy walls, Zoran guided them out of the docking bay, drifting into open space. He set a course for Velocia's system, heart pounding with a mix of determination and dread. Inairi stared out the viewport at the star-speckled darkness. If we fail, He placed a hand on her shoulder. Don't think like that, he urged gently. We'll do everything we can. She turned, eyes glistening. Thank you, Zoran. I don't have anyone else. He felt a lump in his throat. You've got me, he whispered, meaning it more than he meant anything in years. She nodded, biting her lip. In that moment, he swore to himself that he'd stand by her, no matter how grim the odds. Because something in his chest told him that she'd do the same for him. And he was no longer just drifting, he had a purpose, if only to help save the last of her people and, perhaps, find a piece of his own redemption along the way. The journey to the Velocia system took several days in hyperspace. During that stretch, Zoran and Inairi fell into a routine aboard the cramped shuttle. By day, they studied star charts and station listings, searching for any intel that might help them infiltrate Halavris. By night, they swapped stories, halting, painful anecdotes about their pasts. That shared vulnerability forged a bond that felt deeper than mere circumstance. The tension between them also simmered, a quiet undercurrent of desire that flared whenever they brushed against each other in the narrow corridor or huddled over a console. Their kisses grew bolder, exploring each other's differences with wonder. Yet both sensed that the looming confrontation demanded focus. They tried not to let passion distract them too much, though the line between caution and need blurred more each day. Late one evening, after rechecking the NAV route, Zoran found Inairi curled up on the cot, eyes closed in restless sleep. He sank down beside her, brushing a stray filament from her face. She stirred, blinking up at him. The overhead lights cast soft shadows across her scales. He gently took her hand. She rubbed her eyes, then shifted to let him lie beside her. Did you learn anything new? She asked, voice thick with sleep. Not really, he sighed. Halavris is a fortress world for that biotech lab. Heavily guarded. This might be a suicide mission. She closed her eyes, pained. I don't want you to die because of me. He cupped her cheek, tipping her face toward him. I'm choosing this. You didn't force me. He tried for a faint smile. Besides, maybe I'm sick of running for nothing. At least this is running for something. She exhaled shakily. I wish we had help. He shrugged, sliding an arm around her. We might manage some infiltration. The lab's big. They probably don't track every supply ship thoroughly. If we can slip in with a forged ID, maybe we can locate the prisoners and break them out. She nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. They might be too weak to escape. Zoran didn't have an answer for that. He just pulled her closer, letting her rest her head on his chest. We'll adapt, he said quietly, trying to project a confidence he didn't fully feel. The dull hum of the engines underscored his racing thoughts. He stroked her hair, feeling the slight ridges of her skull beneath. She relaxed incrementally, though tension still radiated from her slender body. They fell silent. He sensed the weight of her sorrow, the fear that they would arrive too late. He pressed a soft kiss to her temple, wishing he could promise a happier outcome. I've got you, he murmured. She slipped a hand under his shirt, resting it against his heart, as if seeking proof that he was there, alive and warm. His pulse thrummed beneath her touch. He closed his eyes, letting the closeness wash over him in a wave of tenderness and desire. The battered corners of his soul, once so closed off, opened a little more for her. He thought back to all the times he'd felt alone in the galaxy, drifting. Now, despite the danger ahead, he felt a sense of purpose. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. In that hush, they drifted toward sleep, entangled in each other's arms. The next day, they emerged from hyperspace on the outskirts of the Velocia system. The swirl of stars gave way to a tapestry of planets, shimmering in the blackness. Zoran pinged the local comm relays, picking up chatter from corporate outposts, cargo vessels, and the occasional private yacht. He noted an increase in encrypted transmissions. Near Halavris, likely security patrols. They approached carefully, forging a signal that identified them as a supply ship delivering routine provisions. It was a gamble. If the authorities recognized their false ID, they'd be flagged immediately. Sweat beaded on Zoran's brow as he guided the shuttle into the approach lane. Nairi hovered behind him, silent but resolute. A bored-sounding comm officer eventually hailed them. "Supply vessel, state your cargo and destination." Zoran kept his voice steady. "We've got medical supplies and nutrient packs for the Halavris Biotech Lab. Requesting landing clearance." A pause crackled over the speakers. Then, "Transmit your clearance codes." Zoran uploaded the forged codes they'd scraped together from old data rods. Another pause, longer this time. He gripped the control stick, knuckles white. Nairi's breath was audible behind him. Finally, the comm officer's voice returned, bored as ever. "Clearance confirmed. Proceed to docking bay 12 on landing platform 3. Any unauthorized movement will be met with lethal force." Zoran let out a silent sigh of relief, steering the shuttle into the planet's atmosphere. The surface of Halavris was a blend of green fields, industrial complexes, and a towering main facility ringed by high walls. He angled toward the designated platform, heart pounding. "We're in," he muttered to Nairi. "At least for now." They touched down in a stark metal landing zone beside several other ships. Armed guards in gray uniforms patrolled the perimeter. Zoran exhaled, flicking off the engines. "Here goes nothing," he said. Nairi nodded. "We find them," she whispered, determination shining in her eyes. They lowered the ramp and emerged, cargo crates in tow. Immediately, 2 guards strode over, rifles slung at their shoulders. One barked, "Inspection! Open the crates!" Zoran did as instructed, revealing the legitimate supplies, medical bandages, nutrient packs, carefully arranged around concealed compartments that held a few small tools they might need later. The guard did a cursory check, seeming satisfied. "All right, proceed to intake. They'll direct you where to drop the supplies." "Got it," Zoran replied, mustering a casual nod. They made their way along a fenced corridor that led into the main building's interior. The facility's architecture was sterile and imposing, all white walls and harsh lighting. Lab-coated personnel bustled about, and the smell of antiseptic permeated the air. They followed signs for supply intake, eventually arriving at a loading bay where a bored clerk signed off on their manifest. Zoran's heart pounded. If nobody recognized Nairi's species up close, they might have a shot at blending in just long enough to slip away. So far, nobody had taken a second glance at them. This place was large, with many new arrivals daily. After unloading the crates, Zoran and Nairi lingered in a side corridor, scanning the area. He whispered, "We need to find a security console or terminal to see where they're holding the prisoners. We can't just wander around with no plan." She nodded, eyes sweeping the facility. "I saw a side door labeled restricted. Perhaps it leads to the research sectors." They inched closer to that door, but a passkey reader blocked it. Zoran rummaged in his pocket, pulling out a small device he'd acquired on the station, a passkey spoofer that sometimes worked on older systems. He attached it to the reader, waiting anxiously for the device to cycle through. Each beep felt like a countdown to discovery. A click. The light turned green. He nudged the door open, and they slipped inside. The corridor beyond was quieter, overhead lights flickering at intervals. A sense of unease coiled in Zoran's gut. This was no normal lab area. The air felt heavier, charged with tension. They passed windowed rooms containing strange apparatus, tanks of liquid, medical equipment, and forms strapped to tables. Some of the forms were humanoid, unconscious, or perhaps worse. Nairi sucked in a sharp breath, eyes wide with horror at the cruelty on display. Zoran clenched his jaw, glancing around for a security station. At the far end of the corridor, they spotted a small control booth manned by a single guard. The guard tapped at a console, occasionally glancing through a window into an adjacent holding area. This was their chance. Zoran motioned for Aniri to stay low. He crept forward, hard hammering. The guard was partially turned away, posture relaxed. With grim resolve, Zoran slipped behind him and whacked him hard at the base of the skull with a stolen baton. The guard crumpled silently. Zoran winced, hoping he hadn't done permanent damage, but they had no time for mercy if it meant a risk to Aniri's people. Aniri slid in, shutting the door to the booth. They dragged the unconscious guard out of sight. Zoran hovered over the console, searching for prisoner logs or location data. After a frantic minute, he found a directory referencing Specimen Wing C. Then an ominous line. Subject species, biological anomalies, project subcode, Allovasi. Aniri's eyes lit with recognition. Allovasi is what we call ourselves in our language, she whispered. That must be us. Zoran scanned the data. It says they're in Lab 3, Sublevel B. Some are still alive, but it doesn't say how many. If we're going to free them, that's where we go. She placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. Let's hurry. They snuck out, navigating the labyrinth of sterile hallways. Alarms hadn't sounded yet. Apparently the guard they knocked out hadn't been discovered. Still, every moment felt like borrowed time. They descended a service elevator to sublevel B. The doors slid open onto a stark, cold corridor lined with observation windows. Most were shuttered. Muffled sounds of machinery and faint moans echoed. Finally, they reached a sealed door labeled Lab 3. A pair of armed guards stood outside, alert. Zoran and Aniri ducked into an alcove. We can't just walk up, Zoran muttered. They'll see us. Aniri scanned the corridor, noticed a vent panel near the ceiling. Maybe we can go through there? Zoran followed her gaze. Worth a shot. He boosted her up so she could pry the panel off, then he hoisted himself through behind her. Inside the vent, it was dark and cramped, but they crawled forward slowly, guided by the faint hum of the lab beyond. As they peered through the vent's grate, they saw a heartbreaking sight, a large room with operating tables, tubes, and containment pods. A handful of Allovasi lay restrained or trapped in stasis chambers, their bioluminescent markings flickering weakly. Scientists and technicians moved about, taking samples, running tests. Zoran felt Aniri's hand grip his wrist so tightly it hurt. She trembled with rage and sorrow. They had to do something, but the room was staffed by nearly half a dozen armed guards plus the scientists. Launching a frontal assault seemed suicidal. But if they didn't act now, the Allovasi might never get another chance. Zoran swallowed hard, searching for an idea. He noticed an emergency suppression system overhead, a network of sprinklers and gas vents for chemical spills or fires. Maybe they could use it. He whispered to Aniri, pointing it out. We might be able to trigger the system, create confusion, then get the prisoners out. She nodded, eyes blazing. Yes. Do it. They crawled back a short distance, found a maintenance hatch leading to the suppression controls. After some frantic tinkering, Zoran managed to override the system, setting it to release a neutralizing foam. He hoped it wouldn't harm the Allovasi. The data suggested it was non-toxic. Perfect for chaos, if everything went right. Ready? He hissed, heart pounding. Aniri's jaw clenched. Yes. He activated the override. Alarms instantly blared in the corridor. In the lab, startled scientists looked up as foam rained down from the ceiling, thick and disorienting. Guards shouted, stumbling. Zoran and Aniri leaped into action, slipping down from the vent into the chaos. The foam coated everything, including them, but it gave them cover. Zoran drew his blaster, firing at the guard nearest to the stasis tanks. A shot grazed the guard's shoulder, and he fell with a grunt. Aniri lunged at another guard, using surprising agility to knock him off balance. She grabbed his weapon, delivering a sharp blow that dropped him to the floor. Scientists scrambled, some fleeing, others cowering. Zoran took advantage of the confusion, blasting the control panel that locked the stasis chambers. With a shower of sparks, the energy fields flickered off, and the pods hissed open. One by one, the Allovaci slumped out, weak and disoriented. And Nairi rushed to help them, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Get up! We're here to save you!" A guard emerged from behind a console, firing off a volley of plasma shots. Zoran ducked, returning fire. The foam made visibility terrible, and the sizzling blasts carved holes in the swirling whiteness. He gritted his teeth, focusing on disabling rather than killing if possible. But some shots found their mark, and 2 guards dropped in moans of pain. And Nairi clung to a stumbling Allovaci female, supporting her. "Zoran, we have to get them out!" He nodded, scanning the room. The foam was ankle-deep, but it was thinning now as the system shut off. Some Allovaci were too weak to stand. "We'll carry them," he shouted back. "Everybody who can move, help the others." The survivors, numbering maybe 6, tried to hobble toward the exit. More guards rushed in from the corridor, alerted by the alarms. Zoran realized they were trapped if they didn't clear the path. He fired his blaster at the door frame, forcing the guards to take cover. "We need another way out!" he yelled. And Nairi's gaze darted frantically around. She spotted a large service door on the side. "There!" Zoran led them that way, blasting the lock mechanism. It slid open, revealing a loading bay. More alarms wailed, red lights flashing. He ushered the Allovaci through, heart pounding. "We have to reach the shuttle!" One of the freed Allovaci slumped, barely conscious. And Nairi hoisted them, wincing at the weight. A pair of guards ran in from a side corridor, but Zoran beat them to the draw, sending a barrage of bolts that forced them to duck. He guided the group onward. They sprinted through the corridors, half carrying, half dragging the survivors. The entire facility was on alert now. Sirens howled, lights strobed, and overhead announcements barked orders to contain the breach. Ahead they saw the docking bay they'd originally entered. Guards were converging, sealing the exit. "No choice," Zoran muttered, mentally preparing for a last stand. But a sudden explosion rocked the corridor, sending chunks of debris raining down. He spotted a figure in the distance. A rebellious tech or an overzealous security officer? Hard to say, but the confusion gave them an opening. They barreled through, exchanging frantic gunfire with the reeling guards. Several of the newly freed Allovaci found enough strength to fight, their biological luminescence pulsing fiercely. Zoran watched, amazed, as one unleashed a disorienting flash from her markings that blinded a guard. Another used an extended filament to whip a weapon out of an enemy's hand. Their species had gifts he hadn't realized. Seizing the chance, Zoran yelled, "Run for the shuttle!" They bolted across the open landing platform, ignoring the hail of stray bullets. The ramp was still lowered. Zoran dashed aboard, turning to cover Nairi and the others as they stumbled up. A single guard took aim at Nairi. Zoran's heart lurched. He fired wildly, yelling her name. The guard's shot went wide. And Nairi lunged up the ramp, pulling the last Allovaci behind her. Zoran punched the ramp controls, sealing them in. He scrambled to the cockpit, slamming buttons to ignite the engines. "Brace yourselves!" he roared. The battered shuttle lifted off in a swirl of dust and smoke. Blaster fire from the ground rattled the hull, but the engines held. With a roar, they shot into the sky, away from the complex. Alarms still wailed inside. Zoran toggled the shields, hoping they'd hold against any planetary defense. Sure enough, a warning beep indicated an anti-air turret locking on. He veered hard, pushing the thrusters to their limit. A streak of energy sizzled past them, narrowly missing. The second shot grazed their flank, causing the craft to shudder violently. Panels sparked. "Come on, hold together," he muttered desperately. And Nairi crouched beside him in the co-pilot's seat, face set in fierce determination. "We can do it," she whispered. He angled them into a sharp climb, storming through the upper atmosphere. The hull creaked in protest, but eventually they broke free of the planet's gravity well. One final turret shot zipped beneath them, wide of its mark. Then they were in open space. Zoran engaged the hyperdrive coordinates they'd plotted for a quick escape. The stars stretched into lines, and they vanished into faster than light. Only then did he slump back, panting with adrenaline. The cockpit was filled with the ragged breathing of Aniri and the Alovasi survivors behind them. Some were wounded, whimpering in pain. Aniri turned, kneeling by their side. She cradled a young male whose markings flickered weakly. Others pressed hands to open wounds. "We need medical help," Aniri said urgently. Zoran nodded, voice hoarse. "I'll set a course for a neutral station with decent medical facilities. But we'll need to keep it hush-hush. They'll be hunting us." He swallowed, glancing back at the battered group. "You all fought like hell to get out of there. We're not safe yet, but we will be." One of the Alovasi, an older female with shimmering violet eyes, gazed at him. "Thank you, human," she rasped. "You saved us." He shook his head. "Aniri saved you. I just flew the ship." Aniri looked up at him, eyes glossy with emotion. "We did it together," she murmured. A hush fell as the hyperdrive hummed around them. The Alovasi, though weakened, seemed relieved to be out of captivity. Zoran set course for a discreet outpost in a sector known for shadowy dealings. Risky, but they might find an underground medic there willing to help without too many questions. He only hoped they'd have enough credits. If not, he'd find another way to pay. Once the autopilot engaged, he turned from the console, sliding to the floor beside Aniri and the others. She met his gaze, a tremulous smile touching her lips. In that moment, the weight of what they'd done hit him. They'd actually pulled off a rescue in a place that should have been impenetrable. He reached for her hand, weaving their fingers together. She squeezed back, eyes brimming with tears, grief for those lost, relief for those saved, and gratitude for what they still shared. He felt the tremor of that moment resonate through every fiber of his being. Surrounded by injured survivors, their future uncertain, he still sensed an undeniable hope. Perhaps they weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back, and that fight gave them a reason to live. He brushed Aniri's cheek, leaning in to rest his forehead against hers. They breathed together, hearts pounding in sync. Neither spoke. None of the words they had seemed enough. But in the silence, everything they felt, love, relief, and the promise of something new, spoke loudest of all. At the secret outpost's ramshackle clinic, run by a grizzled ex-military doctor who asked no questions, they spent days nursing the rescued Alovasi back from the brink of death. Zoran sold off nearly every spare part he owned to cover the medical fees, but he did it without complaint. He watched Aniri tend to her people, holding them as they recovered, feeding them, helping them rebuild their strength. In those quiet hours, he saw her become a pillar of emotional resilience for them, her luminescent markings pulsing with comfort. Each day, the fugitives grew stronger. They spoke in soft voices of the horrors in the lab, of those who hadn't survived. Aniri listened, tears often slipping silently down her cheeks, yet her resolve never wavered. She was determined to keep them safe. Zoran found himself assisting more than he'd ever done in his life, changing bandages, fetching water, comforting those in delirium. He was no nurse, but he tried, spurred by the gratitude he saw in Aniri's eyes. Eventually, once the Alovasi were stable, they gathered in a dusty side room to decide the next steps. The older female, who introduced herself as Velua, explained that more of their people might be scattered across the galaxy, refugees from the slavers. They needed a safe haven to regroup, maybe gather survivors. But such a place was hard to find. Zoran leaned against the wall, arms folded. "If we could find an isolated planet or a hidden colony, you could start over. But that requires resources." Velua looked at Aniri. "We trust you, child. You found allies. How do we proceed?" Aniri's gaze flicked to Zoran, and he saw the hope and uncertainty in her eyes. We can't just float forever," she said softly. "Zoran, do you know anywhere that might offer sanctuary, away from corporate eyes?" He bit his lip, thinking. "I know a handful of remote outposts. One's called Daria's Gate, an abandoned mining station near the fringe. Hardly anyone goes there. It's not a paradise, but you might remain unnoticed for a while. Velua inclined her head. That might be enough. We only need time to heal and find others of our kind. The group agreed on that plan. Over the next few days, they gathered supplies, retrofitted Zoran's shuttle to accommodate multiple passengers, and prepared for departure. Zoran was well aware that Targa Collective or corporate enforcers might still be hunting them, but the outpost's secrecy offered temporary protection. Once the Alovasi were ready, they boarded the shuttle, cramming into every spare seat. Zoran fired up the engines. Inairi sat beside him in the co-pilot seat, her gaze drifting over their exhausted group. She reached out, brushing his shoulder. "You've done so much," she whispered. He offered a gentle smile. "We're not done yet. Let's get them safely to Daria's gate first." A hush fell as he guided the shuttle away from the clinic's hidden hangar, slipping into the starry void. The flight was relatively calm, short hops through hyperspace corridors that eventually deposited them near the remote coordinates. Daria's gate appeared on the scanners as a collection of rusted modules clinging to an asteroid, spinning slowly. When they docked, the place looked as dilapidated as Zoran remembered: flickering lights, half-functional atmosphere, corridors strewn with salvage. But it was deserted, safe from prying eyes. The Alovasi disembarked, exploring the modules. Velua turned to Zoran, bowing with gentle respect. "You saved our lives. We have little to give in return, but know that you are forever a friend to our people." He felt a pang of humility. "You owe me nothing. I only did what I had to." Inairi slipped her hand into his, stepping forward. "I'll stay with them for a while," she said, meeting his gaze. "They need me to help rebuild, to find others if we can." His stomach twisted. He realized he'd been avoiding the thought that she might leave his side. But of course she would. These were her people. She'd risked everything to save them. He forced a nod, trying not to let the ache show on his face. "Of course. They need you. You're their leader now, whether you like it or not." He gave a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. She tilted her head, filaments quivering softly. "What about you?" He let out a shaky breath. "I figured I'd keep moving, maybe look for work. I'm nearly out of credits, and my shuttle's battered to hell. I can't stay here forever. I'm not Alovasi." The words tasted bitter, but he knew no other way. He never belonged anywhere, not truly. Her eyes flashed with sudden emotion. "That doesn't mean you must go. We might need someone to help connect with the galaxy, to bring supplies, to watch our backs." She bit her lip. "We need you, Zoran. I need you." He felt his chest tighten. "Inairi." She stepped closer, ignoring the curious glances of her people. The luminescent lines on her arms glowed softly. "I feel something when I'm with you. You have a place here, if you want it." He swallowed past a sudden lump in his throat. "Are you sure? I don't want to intrude on your new home. This is a chance for the Alovasi to rebuild." She cupped his cheek. "You helped make that possible. And you're not just a helper. You've become everything." A wave of emotion coursed through him. He realized that for the first time in his life, someone was offering him a home, a place to belong, not out of obligation but out of genuine care. He glanced around at the rusted station, hardly an idyllic paradise, but it was a fresh start. Then he looked at Inairi's face, so full of tenderness and hope. He exhaled shakily. "I'm not good at this. But I want to try. I don't want to lose you." She smiled, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. "Then stay." She leaned in, pressing her lips to his in a soft, lingering kiss. The Alovasi around them gave small smiles or politely averted their gazes. Zoran melted into the warmth of that kiss, the battered corridors of the station fading away for a moment. He felt the ache of old wounds lessening, replaced by a cautious joy. When she pulled back, both of them were breathless, hearts pounding. A hush stretched, then Velua cleared her throat gently. "We have much to do. Perhaps we can decide how to arrange living quarters. This station can be made habitable." Enairi nodded, slipping her hand into Zoran's. Yes, let's start. Together. That day, they began carving out a refuge in the battered modules, sealing off damaged sections, rerouting power, scrounging life support. Zoran used his pilot skills to make supply runs to neighboring systems, returning with bits of salvage, rations, and medical gear. The Alovasi worked tirelessly to transform the place into a semblance of community, patching floors, painting symbols of their species' heritage across the walls. As time passed, more Alovasi survivors trickled in, word spreading through hushed channels that a safe haven existed. Some arrived wounded, some traumatized, all seeking a place to call their own. Zoran watched the little settlement grow, fueling him with a pride he never felt before. He was part of something that mattered. During quiet evenings, he and Enairi explored the station's corridors hand in hand, whispering about the future. She taught him a few words of her language, the musical syllables dancing on his tongue. He told her stories of his rough childhood, the times he thought life held no meaning. She listened with gentle empathy, sometimes brushing away his tears with tender fingers. Their intimacy deepened, fueled by the raw bond they'd forged through danger and desperation. In the seclusion of a small bunkroom they claimed as their own, they let the walls between them fall away completely. Enairi's luminous patterns glowed against his skin in the low light, and he found himself mesmerized by every breath, every quiet moan, every gentle touch. She discovered the contours of his body with a mixture of curiosity and desire, and he reciprocated, mapping her scaled curves, learning what made her gasp, what made her arch. Their couplings were intense and unguarded, a form of communication deeper than words, a testament to the new life they were forging together. Each time they lay entwined afterward, foreheads pressed together, he felt an overwhelming flood of belonging and protectiveness. Yet it wasn't all easy. The station's harsh conditions meant constant repairs, rationing water and power, dealing with tensions among the newcomers. Zoran sometimes argued with Enairi about how to allocate limited resources. In those moments, their mutual stubbornness flared, leading to heated exchanges that left them both frustrated. But inevitably, they reconciled, drawn together by the shared goal of keeping the Alovasi alive. They learned to navigate these challenges, forging a partnership that balanced their respective strengths. Enairi became a guiding light for her people, her empathy and determination uniting them. Zoran became a bridge to the outside, ensuring they had the supplies and allies necessary to remain hidden. Whenever doubt gnawed at him, he only had to see the grateful smiles on the Alovasi's faces, or recall the softness in Enairi's eyes as she whispered his name, and he knew he'd made the right choice. Months slid by in a blur of labor and small victories. Daria's Gate slowly transformed from a derelict asteroid station into a humble sanctuary. The Alovasi planted small hydroponic gardens in the old cargo bays, filled the corridors with gentle glowing murals, and created communal spaces where they could sing the songs of their nearly lost heritage. Zoran found himself enthralled by their culture, the delicate dances they performed under dimmed lights, the collective hum of their luminescent patterns that resonated like living music. One evening, Enairi slipped her hand into Zoran's and led him to the station's observation deck, a small transparent dome that offered a sweeping view of the stars. They stood side by side, gazing out at the infinite darkness speckled with distant lights. "Look how far we've come," she murmured, leaning against his shoulder. "We were both lost, now we have a home." He wrapped an arm around her waist, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I never thought I'd have one again," he admitted quietly, eyes reflecting starlight. "But this feels real." She turned to face him, filaments shimmering around her face. "It is real. You helped make it real." He brushed his thumb over her cheek, marveling at the softness of her lavender skin. "What do your people call this kind of bond?" he asked. She closed her eyes, a gentle glow crossing her markings. "We call it the Urvash, when two souls intertwine so deeply that neither is alone anymore." A lump rose in his throat. "Sounds about right." She lifted her gaze to his. "Will you share it with me? The Urvash?" He swallowed, heart pounding. There was no question in his mind. "Yes," he whispered. "I want that. I want you." A shimmer of tears graced her eyes as she drew him in for a tender kiss under the dome of endless stars. The Alovacide believed that their luminescence was an echo of the cosmos within them, and in that moment Zoran felt it, like the universe pulsed with every breath they took together. Their kiss lingered, a silent vow. And though the galaxy beyond was still dangerous, filled with those who would harm them, for now, they had carved out a pocket of peace and love. Zoran felt Aniri's heartbeat against his chest, a rhythmic reminder that he was no longer drifting alone. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her cheek against him, the stars reflected in her dark eyes. "We'll protect this place," she murmured. "Protect each other." Zoran nodded, resolve coursing through him. "Always," he vowed. Below them, through the dome, they could see the lights of the station's modules glowing in the darkness, a testament to the resilience of hope. A place once forsaken now housed a fragile but determined community. And within that battered shell, two hearts had found what they thought was lost forever: belonging, love, and the courage to face whatever the galaxy might hurl their way next.